Hi, I'm Camille. My parents banned me from my sister's wedding because I'd ruin the mood. What they didn't know was that I held the deed to the cabin she used to borrow $78,000 for that same wedding. A cabin I saved when I was 18. A cabin my dad left to me in a notarized will. For 23 years, I kept that secret buried until they forced me to dig it up. So, before we begin, tell me, if your own mother erased your name for someone else's party, would you stay quiet or show up with the truth? The napkins were folded into perfect triangles, the kind that looked like someone had ironed each one individually before placing them beside the antique silverware. My mother always believed presentation could fix anything. Tension: fold a napkin. Resentment: add lemon slices to the water pitcher. Decades of quiet damage tucked neatly beneath polished surfaces and fresh peonies. It was a sunny Sunday in late April. The kind of day people call picturesque. Warm breeze, blue sky, and a faint scent of cut grass. My mother's backyard patio in Fairview Hills was filled with cousins I hadn't seen since Christmas, aunts in pastel cardigans and uncles in golf polos, who always forgot which of us was which. I sat at the far end of the long table right next to the decorative ficus she bought from an interior catalog years ago. It still had a barcode sticker on one of the bottom leaves. My coffee had gone lukewarm. I hadn't touched the scone in front of me, but I'd shredded the napkin into pieces so small I couldn't even piece them back together if I tried. This brunch was supposed to be a pre-wedding celebration. For Sienna, my younger sister, the golden one. The one who always looked like she belonged on a holiday card or a fashion campaign. She was getting married in 3 weeks to a man named Travis who had great hair and the personality of a saltine cracker. But he looked good in photos, so that probably counted for something. The conversation around me was light, buzzing with excitement. Someone laughed loudly about a photo booth idea. Another person passed around a mock-up of the seating chart. I pretended to check my phone, though there were no notifications. I hadn't received anything. No email, no text, no invitation. Then Aunt Moira, God bless her mimosa-fueled enthusiasm, held up her phone, her face glowing. Just RSVP'd to Sienna's wedding, she chirped. The website is stunning. Like if Vogue married Pinterest. So classy. I blinked. A slow, almost involuntary reaction. Wedding website. She looked at me, puzzled. You didn't RSVP yet. My spoon froze midair, hovering above a cup of melon and blueberries. I smiled faintly, carefully, the way you do when your skin's too thin and someone's poked too hard. I haven't received an invitation. The silence that followed was immediate and total. Like the air had thickened. Conversations around the table trailed off one by one, collapsing like dominoes. I felt all the eyes, not directly, never directly, but at the corners of glances, in the slight shift of someone's chair. And then I heard her. Sienna. That's because you're not invited, Camille. Her voice was calm. Controlled. Like she'd rehearsed it. Maybe she had. There was something in the way she held her coffee cup, pinky out, shoulders back. She wasn't embarrassed. She was ready. I turned toward her slowly, as if sudden movement might make this feel less real. My mother, seated directly beside her, didn't miss a beat. She lifted her champagne flute, catching a shard of sunlight, and smiled softly. It's better this way, darling. You know how you tend to shift the mood. Let's not pretend otherwise. I felt the blood rise to my face, not from shame, from fury. The kind that builds in layers over years of being silenced, dismissed, tucked into corners, and painted over with politeness. No one said a word. Someone reached for the butter dish. Another cleared their throat. It was like they had choreographed this moment, and I was the only one without a script. And then, softly behind me, a whisper I wasn't meant to hear. She always ruins things. Drama queen. I didn't turn around. My spine stiffened. I set my napkin down, folded carefully, like I was still pretending to play nice. I stood. Excuse me. The only sound was the wind catching the edge of the tablecloth. I walked away, each step heavier than the last, like gravity was trying to pull me back into that performance. But I didn't stop. I crossed the patio, down the stone steps, across the neatly manicured lawn, past the rows of tulips my mother replanted every spring like she could control the seasons. By the time I reached my car, my face was tight like I was holding together 1,000 tiny cracks that might split if I let go. Inside, the air felt different, still quiet, safe. My hands trembled as I reached into my purse for my keys. And that's when I felt it. The small brass key. Smooth. Worn down at the edges from years of rubbing it like a worry stone. I hadn't used it in years, but I always kept it with me, not for what it opened, but for what it meant. The cabin. A place tucked deep in the Washington mountains where the air smelled like pine and sap and time moved differently. Where my father once told me that some things were ours to protect even when no one else understood why. I stared at the key in my hand, heart thudding not from surprise but from something older. Deeper. A sense that something was shifting. Cracking open. So this is how it's going to be. The words came out quiet, just a breath against the stillness. They had excluded me like I didn't matter. Like I hadn't been the one who held things together when everyone else unraveled. Like I hadn't given up things they never even noticed just to keep something sacred alive. They had toasted to Sienna again and again. But they had no idea what I had saved. And they were about to find out. I drove for hours that afternoon not to escape but to think, to let the road unwind something in me. The hum of the tires on the highway gave rhythm to memories I hadn't touched in years. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was low, painting long shadows across the front yard. I parked but didn't go inside right away. Instead, I sat behind the wheel, fingers still curled around the cabin key until the silence became too thick to bear. Inside the house, everything felt smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was just me stretched thin by old wounds. I kicked off my shoes and went straight to the hall closet. There was a box behind the coats wedged under an old suitcase. I hadn't opened it in more than a decade. It still smelled like cedar and attic dust. I carried it to the kitchen table and opened it carefully as if the papers inside might crumble. Under a stack of utility bills and tax returns was what I was looking for. A worn leather folder, soft at the corners. My fingers knew exactly where to flip. I found the envelope tucked inside, aged but intact. My name was written in my father's blocky handwriting, the ink slightly faded. The flap was sealed but brittle. I hesitated just for a second, then opened it. Inside were 3 items. A photocopy of a cashier's check for $6,000 made out to the Ashwood Ridge County Treasurer, dated August 2001. A handwritten letter on yellow legal paper. And a notarized deed transfer with my father's signature, mine, a notary stamp, and the name of a witness I didn't recognize at the time. My chest tightened. The letter was short but specific. He thanked me for saving the cabin when no one else noticed the county's final notice in the mail. He apologized for not being able to do more. Then he said the words I had carried with me, memorized without even meaning to. This place is yours to protect. Back then, I was just 18. My father had just come home from the hospital after his stroke, thinner than I had ever seen him, his voice quieter, like he was always running out of breath. My mother had been overwhelmed, snapping at everyone, too focused on prescriptions and insurance paperwork to notice much else. It was me who found the notice on the kitchen counter. A final warning from the county. If the back taxes weren't paid in 30 days, the property would go to auction. I remember walking into his room holding the letter like it was on fire. He didn't panic. He just closed his eyes, took a long breath, and said he would fix it. But I could see the weariness in his hands. I didn't tell him I had the money. I had a scholarship refund sitting in my savings account. It was supposed to go toward textbooks and rent for my first semester in Portland. I used it the next morning. Drove to the treasurer's office alone. Paid in cash. Got a receipt and drove back in silence. When I told him what I'd done, he stared at me like he wasn't sure if he should be angry or proud. Then he reached for my hand and said it again. This place is yours to protect. He had always loved that cabin more than anything we owned. Not for its value, but for what it held. His tools, his notebooks, his quiet, his peace. The next week he took me to the notary's office in town. It was small, tucked between a dry cleaner and a feed store. He signed a deed transfer listing me as the legal heir and caretaker of the cabin. The woman who notarized it didn't say much, just stamped and filed. He handed me the envelope that same day, told me to keep it safe. And I had. For 23 years. I looked down at the letter now, rereading every line like I was trying to hear his voice through the ink. My eyes blurred by the end, but I didn't cry. There was something steadier inside me. Not sadness. Resolve. I picked up the phone and called the Ashwood Ridge County Recorder's office. It rang 4 times before someone answered. A woman named Trish, voice clipped but polite. "Hi," I said. "I'm trying to verify a deed. I have the original notarized copy here, but I need to confirm the current ownership of the property." She asked for the parcel number. I gave her the address. She tapped away on her keyboard. There was a pause. According to our records, the property was transferred to a Lorraine Drake in September 2018. "Do you have a case number or document ID?" My mouth went dry. That was 3 years after my father died. "No," I said slowly. That doesn't sound right. It was deeded to me in 2001. "I have the paperwork." She made a small sound, half sigh, half sympathy. "Ma'am, property transfers do happen posthumously. If a new deed was filed with proper signatures and the required form, it can override a previous one. Even notarized ones, depending on language." I felt my fingers tighten around the phone. And what if that later deed was filed without the original heir's knowledge? She hesitated. "Then you'll need to file a formal dispute. I can't give legal advice, but we see situations like this more often than you'd think. Family property. Things get complicated." I thanked her, though the words tasted bitter. After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen, the envelope open on the table, the papers spread before me like puzzle pieces no one else knew existed. 3 years after my father died, my mother had transferred the cabin into her own name. Quietly. Without telling me. She must have had the original records overwritten with newer ones. How, I didn't know. But she had done it. While I had been busy building my own life, trusting her to respect his wishes, she had erased me. And Sienna. I thought back to the brunch, to her cold smile. She must have known. She was never one to take chances without backup. I stood and walked to the front room, pulled open the drawer in the old oak desk, and took out a yellow legal pad. I started making a list. A copy of the letter. The deed. The receipt. The notary's name. The county clerk. Witnesses. Everything I'd need to prove what they had rewritten. Then I reached into my bag and picked up the cabin key again. It felt heavier now, not just metal but memory. Proof. If my mother wanted to pretend I never existed in this story, she had made one mistake. I remembered everything. I barely slept that night. The documents stayed spread across the dining table like some ancient map, and I kept circling them, rereading the notary seal, tracing my father's signature with my fingertip like it might suddenly offer a clue I had missed. At one point, I turned on the lamp, not because I needed the light, but because I couldn't stand the dark pressing in around me. By morning, I knew I needed to go back. Not to the county office this time, but somewhere I hadn't touched in over a decade. The basement storage. It was cold and smelled like old paint and cardboard. I opened the plastic bin labeled Tax Home Docs in Sharpie and pulled out folders thick with outdated statements. In the back, behind a crinkled stack of warranty receipts, I found it. A navy blue accordion file labeled Cabin. My heart kicked. I took it upstairs, laid it out next to the other documents, and began combing through the sections. Water bills, repair invoices, property tax payments. I reached the tab marked Finance and found something I hadn't remembered filing. It was a copy of a credit application from Harrison Federal Credit Union. The cabin's address was listed under Assets. The applicant was Sienna Drake. The loan amount was $78,000. Date issued the 12th of February of this year. My breath caught. I read it again, slower. Then again. The property she used as collateral was the same one I thought had still been mine. I stood up so fast the chair scraped back against the hardwood. My fingers were trembling. Sienna had used the cabin, the one I protected, the one Dad deeded to me as security for her wedding loan. I sat back down, clutching the edge of the table. The papers blurred for a moment as my eyes welled, but I didn't cry. Not from sadness. It was something sharper, something with edges. I thought of the brunch. The way she smiled when she told me I wasn't invited. The way Mom lifted her glass like it was a toast. I imagined them in some office together, filing papers behind my back, erasing me with each notarized stamp. I reached for my laptop and pulled up the Harrison Federal website. I logged in with the old shared account I had from years ago when Mom convinced me we should centralize everything for convenience. The login still worked. She had never removed me as a joint user. The loan showed up under recent activity. Secured loan. Property 709 Pine Hollow Road, Ashwood Ridge. That was the cabin. Status active. The payment summary showed funds were dispersed the same week she posted pictures of her custom floral installations on social media. Cream roses. Hanging hydrangeas. Handmade candle holders from a designer in Santa Barbara. I scrolled through the transaction notes. Down payment wired to Duval Events. Initial deposit to Rose and Vine Catering. A final note, bridal suite reservation at Elbridge Manor. I couldn't stop shaking. This wasn't just betrayal, this was theft. Quiet, polished theft dressed up as family planning. I shut the laptop and stood pacing the kitchen. The tile was cold against my bare feet. A breeze slipped in through the cracked window above the sink, and it made the documents flutter slightly like they wanted to escape. I picked up the letter Dad wrote again. His words felt heavier now, sharper. This place is yours to protect. Back then, I thought it meant responsibility. Memory. The honor of carrying something forward, but now I could hear what I'd missed. It was a warning. He knew, he saw it coming. And he tried to shield me the only way he could. But I hadn't protected it. I had trusted them. I went to the living room, pulled out my phone, and dialed Aunt Margot. She picked up on the third ring, voice groggy but alert. Camille, everything okay? I didn't bother with small talk. Did you know Sienna took out a loan using the cabin? There was a pause. I could hear her breathing. She used the cabin, yes, to finance her wedding. And I just found out Mom transferred the deed to herself 3 years after Dad died. Without telling me. Then Sienna used it as collateral. Another pause. Then quietly. You're not the only thing they rewrote. What does that mean? She exhaled slowly. There are things your mother buried with your father. Choices he made that she didn't agree with. I think she decided if she ignored them long enough they'd disappear. I sat down hard on the arm of the couch. But they were legal. Witnessed. Stamped. Filed. That doesn't always stop people like your mother. I stared at the cabin folder still sitting on the kitchen table. Did you know he left it to me? Officially, I knew he wanted to. But no, I didn't know he followed through. He did. I have the notarized deed. I have his letter. I even have the payment receipt. Then don't let them bury you too. We hung up not long after. Her words stayed in the air long after the call ended. I walked to the window and looked out across the quiet street. The neighbors were watering their lawns, walking their dogs. Nothing looked out of place. But inside my chest, everything had shifted. I didn't just need to prove what they'd done, I needed to undo it. Piece by piece. I picked up the folder again and pulled out the loan statement. Her name, her signature, the cabin address. She thought I wouldn't notice. She thought I would stay quiet like always. She was wrong. And I had the documents to prove it. The next morning I filled the gas tank without thinking, packed a bag with a flashlight, a sweatshirt, and the folder of documents and pointed my car north toward Ashwood Ridge. The highway wound past mossy trees and old roadside diners, the kind Dad used to stop at for butterscotch pie. I didn't need music. The silence was louder. Familiar curves of the road came back like muscle memory. Every turn toward the mountain felt heavier, like I was driving into the core of something that had been waiting for me. By the time I pulled into the gravel driveway late afternoon, light was spilling through the canopy of fir trees that bordered the cabin. The air smelled like damp wood and pollen. I killed the engine and sat for a minute, heart pounding, hands cold. I hadn't been here in almost 6 years. But it looked the same. The pine shutters, the uneven porch step. Dad never fixed the brass lantern above the door that flickered when it rained. Then I saw it. A glow from the kitchen window. Someone was inside. I got out slowly, gravel crunching beneath my boots. I moved along the side of the cabin, heart thudding with every step. As I rounded the porch, I saw her. My mother. She stood at the dining table, sleeves rolled up, surrounded by open bins and tissue paper. Ribbons, candles, and white lanterns were scattered everywhere. She was humming, folding something. She didn't look up when I opened the screen door. She only glanced at me when I stepped inside. "Camille," she said mildly, like I had just dropped by with fresh jam. I was checking on the wedding decor. Some of the vintage lanterns were up here. I didn't want them to get dusty. I looked at the mess on the table. It wasn't just a few items. She had turned the entire cabin into a prep station for Sienna's wedding. The place Dad called sacred. The place he trusted me to protect. At midnight, she smiled faintly. "You're being dramatic again." I stepped past her, dropped the folder on the table, and unfolded the deed. The paper lay flat between us. Legal. Stamped. Dated. My name clearly printed. She didn't even blink. "That was never valid," she said. I stared at her. "It's notarized. It's filed. It's real." She gave a small laugh, the condescending kind she always saved for me. "Your father was not in his right mind when he wrote that. He had just come out of the hospital. He was emotional. He would have promised the moon if you held his hand." My voice dropped. "You're saying he didn't know what he was doing." "I'm saying he made a lot of promises he couldn't keep. Especially when it came to you." There it was. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the digital voice recorder. I clicked it on and laid it next to the deed. A tiny red light blinked. "Say that again," I said. "Say the deed wasn't real." Her eyes flicked to the device. "Oh, for heaven's sake. What do you think you're doing? No one is going to believe you. You've always been fragile. Always looking for a fight that isn't there." "Why did Sienna use the cabin to secure a loan then?" I asked. "That was an administrative error." Her voice lost its rhythm for the first time. "I'll look into it." "You didn't think I'd ever check, did you? You thought I'd stay quiet. Like always." She didn't deny it. Instead, she turned back to her ribbon pile, untangling a long piece like we were discussing weather patterns. I turned away from her and walked toward the hallway. The closet still had the old camping gear. Dad's toolbox. Fishing line. A rusted lantern. I dug through the back until I found it. His black tape recorder. The kind with rectangular cassettes we hadn't used since dial-up internet. There was a note taped to it. "Cabin. The 4th of April." I popped in the cassette. Closed the flap. Clicked play. There was static. A pause. Then his voice. "If you're hearing this, something's gone wrong." I stopped breathing. I made it clear. Camille inherits the cabin. I filed the deed. I left instructions. If they try to change this, fight it. I named Frank Temple as witness. You'll find everything in my office. The recording clicked off. My knees buckled and I sat on the edge of the coffee table. The air left my lungs in one long exhale. He knew. He had known they'd try to erase me. And he left this. I looked at the recorder, still in my hands, blinking red. I replayed his voice. Once. Then again. Behind me, my mother stood silent, finally still. She had heard every word. "You don't belong here anymore," she said quietly. I stood up slowly. "I do. Legally. Morally. Emotionally." I walked past her, hand brushing the doorframe as I stepped outside. The air smelled like pine and rain. For the first time in years, the cabin felt like mine again. Not because it was peaceful, because it remembered. I stepped off the porch and into the dusk, gravel crunching beneath my boots as I made my way back to the car. The pine trees swayed gently in the evening breeze, and for a moment I stood still beside the driver's door, breathing in the cool mountain air. My mind wasn't quiet, but something inside me had shifted. My father hadn't just left behind a piece of property. He'd left a message buried in cassette tape and legal paper that whispered through decades and dared me to listen. By the time I got home, it was nearly 10. The porch light was still on, casting a golden circle over the front step. I left the cabin documents on the passenger seat for a second longer before finally grabbing them and heading inside. I made tea. I didn't drink, paced from the kitchen to the den and back again. My heart was steady, but my thoughts were wildfire. I opened my laptop and pulled up the HOA portal for Pine Hollow Estates. I found the directory and scanned for the name I remembered from years ago. Ellie Carver. Board chair, still there. I clicked on the contact form, attached scans of everything: the deed, the notary statement, the letter from my father, and a photo of the cassette recorder with his handwriting taped to it. My message was short. Hello, Miss Carver. I am submitting official documents confirming my legal ownership of the property at 709 Pine Hollow Road. Please confirm the HOA's records reflect this status. Additionally, I understand a request was made to use this property as a wedding venue. I am requesting full clarification of that request and confirmation of my authority to approve or deny. Regards, Camille Drake. I hit send. The moment I did, a weight left my shoulders, a small one but real. The response came the next morning at 8:43 a.m. Dear Miss Drake, thank you for your submission. Upon review of the attached documentation and our internal records, the HOA confirms that you are listed as the legal title holder of 709 Pine Hollow Road. A venue usage request was submitted under the name of Sienna Drake for an event scheduled May 11. Please confirm whether you approve this request. Respectfully, Ellie Carver, Pine Hollow HOA. I read it twice. Then again. No emotion came. Just certainty. I opened a new email window, typed 2 words. Use denied. Then I closed my laptop. At first the silence held. Hours passed. I swept the kitchen, reorganized a shelf, took a walk around the block. But around 3 in the afternoon, the buzzing began. It started with a ping on Instagram. A tag. Someone had posted a story and linked me in it. I opened the app and there it was. A photo clearly taken at brunch. Blurry but unmistakable. Me walking away from the table, back, rigid hair in a loose twist, one hand clenched by my side. The caption, soft pink font over a pale filter. Some people can't stand to see you shine. Below it, a smaller line. But I shine anyway. It was Sienna. Of course it was. I tapped through her stories. More of the same. Wedding planning snippets. White roses, custom menus. A slow zoom on her ring. Her tone wasn't angry, it was curated. Polished. She was spinning the story before I even had a chance to speak. I didn't respond. I closed the app, silenced my notifications, and went back to the kitchen. I poured a glass of water, drank half, and set it down. The next buzz came from a text. A number I hadn't saved, but I knew the tone. Cam, it's Cassie. From high school. You okay? I stared at the screen. Then another message came through a minute later. Saw something going around on Insta. Heard about the cabin. Just. Are you doing all right? I didn't reply. Not immediately. I walked into the living room, pulled out the folder again, and laid everything back out. I wasn't looking for anything, I just needed to see it. To touch the evidence of what was mine. The deed. The recording. The notarized form. My father's signature. My name. The cabin was never just property. It was protection, a promise. And now it was leverage. Another message came through. This time not from Cassie. Unknown number. What are you doing? Everyone's talking. No name, no punctuation. Just that. I exhaled through my nose, walked to the back door, and stood outside. The wind had picked up. My neighbor across the street was unloading groceries from her trunk, completely unaware of the storm gathering in my life. What am I doing? I was correcting the lie they built on my silence. I walked back inside, picked up my phone, and finally texted Cassie. Not sure what you've heard, but I'm not ruining anything. I'm reclaiming what was stolen. 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. Then reappeared. Then nothing. It didn't matter. The truth had a funny way of spreading once it found a crack. And the first one had just opened. I hadn't planned to go. Not really. But the moment Sienna posted her brunch outfit on Instagram with a caption that read, "Ready to celebrate love with my people," something shifted in my chest. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. She had erased me from her guest list, but I was still on the deed. Still in the foundation. She could hide my name on her seating chart, but not from the paperwork. Or the truth. I pulled the gray dress from the back of my closet. It was simple, tailored, clean. The kind of dress that didn't ask for permission to belong in a room. I tied my hair into a low knot, minimal makeup, and slipped into black flats. My reflection stared back with a kind of stillness I hadn't seen in years. It didn't look like revenge, it looked like composure. The brunch was held at the Elbridge Country Club, all marble floors and high ceilings polished to the point of reflection. I pulled into the circular drive and handed my keys to the valet. He hesitated for a half second, glanced down at his clipboard, then back at me. "Name, ma'am, Camille Drake." He blinked unsure, then handed me the ticket without another word. That was the first ripple. Inside, everything was lavender and gold. The tables were covered in soft linen. Towering arrangements of white orchids and pale pink tulips filled the air with an artificial sweetness. Name cards edged in gold foil glittered under the chandeliers. I walked in quietly, not expecting a welcome. I didn't need one. The conversations at the front tables dipped as I entered. A few heads turned. Then more. Eyes flicked from face to face like dominoes falling. I walked with purpose, scanning for an empty seat. There wasn't one. That was the point. I stood behind the last row where the light from the windows barely touched the carpet. My hands rested gently on the back of an empty chair, though I never sat down. I didn't need to. I just needed to be visible. Sienna spotted me first. Her eyes widened just enough to register discomfort before her mouth stretched into a practiced smile. She leaned toward her fiancé, Trent, who didn't look my way at all. Her fingers twitched against the tablecloth. Her face said grace. Her posture said panic. The planner appeared next. Mia, young, high-strung, always holding a clipboard like it was a lifeline. She moved between tables, checking timing with the servers, then leaned in to whisper something to Sienna. I saw it unfold in slow motion. Mia glanced at her tablet, blinked, then looked up. "Excuse me," she said, her voice louder than she realized. "Sorry to interrupt, but we're still showing Camille Drake as the cabin owner on the venue permit. Just want to confirm whether that's being updated before the ceremony paperwork gets filed." You could hear the champagne fizz. The room went still. A fork clinked. Somewhere someone inhaled too sharply. One guest murmured just barely above a whisper. "Oh, so it's true." Sienna froze. Her smile faltered, lips pressing into a thin line. She didn't respond. Lorraine didn't miss a beat. "Handle it," she said through her teeth, eyes never leaving her plate. Mia looked between them, clearly confused. "Of course. I'll wait for the update then." She stepped away, already typing on her tablet. I reached for the coffee carafe on the side table and poured myself a cup. Slowly. Steady hand. The porcelain clinked just once against the saucer as I lifted it. I took a sip and let the silence settle. No one dared speak to me. But everyone watched. And in that moment, I wasn't the forgotten older sister. I wasn't the difficult one. I was the name on the deed. The crack in their perfect story. I caught Sienna's eye just long enough to offer a soft smile. Not smug, just knowing. She looked away. Fast. Trent shifted in his chair but still never looked at me. Lorraine adjusted her pearls like it might anchor her in place. I stirred cream into my coffee unbothered while their perfect brunch cracked quietly down the middle. The rest of the event went on as much as it could. But no one was really listening to the speeches. The centerpieces no longer dazzled. The playlist felt too loud, too curated. People whispered behind their napkins. A few phones lit up under the tablecloths. I didn't need to say a word. I had already said everything that mattered. In ink, in filing, in presence. I stayed until the cake was wheeled and then slipped out the side entrance without a sound. As I walked to my car, I passed the valet booth. The same young man glanced up from his list. This time he didn't ask for my name. He simply handed over the keys. "Have a nice afternoon, ma'am." I nodded, slid into the car, and pulled away without checking the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind me I needed to see. Under the fading light of early evening, I stepped inside my house and shut the door behind me, letting the lock click into place with a finality that settled deep in my bones. My phone was still in my hand, but I didn't check it. I placed it on the entry table, walked into the kitchen, and poured a glass of water. My fingers trembled only slightly as I raised the glass to my lips. There was no satisfaction in what had happened at the brunch, only confirmation. They had erased me in silence, and I had responded without speaking a word. Still, the quiet that followed didn't feel restful. It felt like the moment just before a storm breaks dense electric waiting. It arrived the next morning. I had just stepped out of the shower when I heard the doorbell. Once, then again. Measured. Expectant. I wrapped a towel around my hair and grabbed a hoodie, tugging it over my head as I moved through the hallway. When I opened the door, there they were. Lorraine Drake, in her usual cream wool coat, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. Behind her stood a man I didn't recognize, late 50s, sharp suit, thin leather briefcase in hand. He didn't smile. And flanking them, both hands in his pockets, was Travis. I stared for a moment, surprised to see him, but he didn't look at me. His eyes were low, jaw tight. My mother, on the other hand, was already stepping past me into the living room before I could decide whether or not to let her in. "We won't take much of your time," she said lightly, like she'd stopped by to borrow sugar. I stood still as the lawyer followed her, nodding politely as if formality could soften what they had come to do. Travis hesitated at the threshold. Our eyes met. He didn't smile either. He looked tired. "Camille, this is Mr. Halberd," my mother said, gesturing to the man in the suit. "He's helping finalize some loose ends regarding the cabin." Mr. Halberd placed his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with a soft snap. He pulled out a document and a pen, laying them neatly side by side like a magician preparing for a trick. "We'd like you to sign a custodianship acknowledgement," he said smoothly. "It simply confirms that your father designated you as a temporary caretaker of the property, with the understanding that full ownership would revert to the family once certain milestones were reached." I blinked. "This isn't real." "It's a standard document," he replied, still calm. "Your father may have filed papers years ago, but verbal agreements often supplement written ones. This acknowledgement simply reflects the arrangement your family followed in practice. Number." I walked to the side cabinet, opened the drawer, and pulled out the accordion folder. I laid it on the coffee table beside his sleek leather briefcase and began pulling out the contents one by one. First, the notarized deed. Filed, sealed. Dated the 5th of September 2001. Then the letter in my father's angular handwriting, folded but uncreased. Then the tax receipt, $6,000 paid in full by me. Then the photograph, me and my father on the cabin porch, the notary seated beside us, all signatures visible. Finally, I set the cassette tape recorder on the table and clicked play. My father's voice filled the room, clear despite the age of the tape. "If they try to change this, fight it." I left instructions. "You'll find everything in my office. Camille is the only one who ever sat still long enough to hear what this place means." When it ended, no one moved. I turned to Travis. "She used the cabin for a loan," I said quietly. "A $78,000 loan for flowers and seating charts." Travis didn't respond. He looked at the photo in front of him, then at the tape recorder. His throat moved as he swallowed hard. Mr. Halberd finally spoke. "This tape. Is this verifiable?" I raised an eyebrow. "It's dated. And if you'd like, I can produce a sworn statement from Mr. Lambert, our neighbor who drove the notary back to town that day. He remembers it all." Lorraine finally broke her silence. "Your father changed his mind." "No," I said, cutting her off. "You changed the records." "He would have." "He didn't." I stood up, voice steady now. "You filed a fraudulent deed 3 years after his death. You pretended I didn't exist, and you let Sienna use it like a pawn in her wedding fairy tale." My mother's lips tightened. "You don't understand what family sacrifice looks like." "I do," I said. "I was 18. I gave up my scholarship. I paid those taxes when no one else noticed the final warning letters." She stood. "You're humiliating your sister." She humiliated herself. Mr. Halberd looked visibly uncomfortable now. He gathered the document he'd presented and returned it to his briefcase. I won't be signing anything today, I told him. Or ever. Travis finally spoke. Camille. I didn't know. His voice was low, cracking a little. I know, I said. He looked at me, then back at Lorraine, and without another word turned and walked out. My mother followed slower, as if reluctant to leave the room where her version of the truth had just collapsed. When the door closed behind them, I stood alone in the living room. My hands trembled slightly, but not with fear, with certainty. Finally. The clouds had started rolling in by midday, low and slow, like thoughts I didn't want to unpack yet. I had just settled into the couch with a notebook open on my lap, half full of scribbled dates and paper trails, when I heard the soft crunch of tires on gravel outside. I peeked through the window and froze. It was a silver Subaru, its headlights blinking off as it came to a stop by the curb. The car was old but well kept, the kind that had survived decades of careful ownership. My pulse quickened, not from fear but from recognition. The door opened and Aunt Margot stepped out, slower than I remembered, but with the same grace in her shoulders. She wore a raincoat, the hem darkened with moisture, and cradled a plain cardboard box in both hands. She didn't wave. She just walked up the path like she'd done it 1,000 times. I opened the door before she could knock. I wasn't sure you'd still be here, she said softly. I wasn't sure anyone still knew where I lived. She gave a small smile. He made me promise to bring this to you. I kept it sealed until now. We moved into the kitchen, the quiet between us warm and fragile. I cleared the table and set the box down gently. She took off her coat and hung it over the back of the chair, her hands moving like ritual. He gave this to me in the fall of 2001, she said. After the surgery. Said he didn't trust your mother with it. I untied the twine that held the box shut and opened the flaps. Inside were layers of time-yellowed envelopes, tax documents, handwritten letters folded into neat thirds. At the very top, a sealed envelope with my name written in my father's unmistakable handwriting. I stared at it for a second before opening it. Camille, this place is yours. Not because you asked for it, but because you protected it without ever needing recognition. That kind of loyalty is rare. Don't let them convince you it's weakness. They may challenge it. They may try to bury it. But truth has roots. And you know how to care for roots. I pressed the letter to my chest, trying to hold it all in, his words, my breath, the sudden weight behind my eyes. Under the letter was a document I hadn't seen before. A handwritten draft of his will dated the 7th of October 2001. It named me explicitly as the sole heir of the cabin. It referenced the tax payment, the repairs I helped coordinate, and even a line I remembered him saying once. She's the only one who listens when the wind moves through the pines. I looked up. He never stopped believing in you, Margot said. Even when the rest of them were too busy watching Sienna twirl. I smiled through a burn in my throat. You knew about the loan, she nodded. I didn't know how bad it got. But, yes. Your mother and Sienna made choices your father never would have signed off on. He told me clear as day, if something happens to me, make sure Camille keeps what she's already earned. And the taxes. She pulled another slip from the box. A carbon copy of the check I had written to the Ashwood Ridge tax office, marked paid and dated in February 2001. He never cashed that scholarship refund, did he? Number, I whispered. I used it all. And I never told anyone. He knew. That's why he wrote all this down. I held the tax receipt in one hand, the will draft in the other. They weren't just papers. They were proof of something I had felt for so long, but had never been able to say aloud, that I mattered to him in ways beyond words. That I hadn't imagined it. I had protected the place that carried his spirit even when no one else thought it worth saving. We sat together in silence. The kind of silence that wasn't awkward or empty but reverent. Margot sipped the tea I poured her. I just stared at the documents, afraid to blink and miss something important. Before she left, she placed one more envelope on the table. What's this? His last note. I kept it tucked in my jewelry box. Couldn't bear to let it go until now. I opened it slowly. Camille. If they turn this into a battle, don't let them twist you into someone else. You don't have to yell to be heard. You don't need to burn things down to protect what matters. Just be who you've always been. That's what saved this place. That's what will save you. When I looked up, Margot's eyes were glassy too. He was proud of you. You know that, right? I nodded. For the first time in years, I really did. The sky had darkened by the time I pulled the curtains shut and turned off the porch light. Inside, the kitchen still smelled like mint tea and pine, and the photographs were spread across the table like pieces of a map I had forgotten I owned. I picked them up one by one, slipping each into a manila folder I labeled by hand Property Archive. It felt clinical, but it helped. Sorting proof into order gave me something to hold when everything else had been emotion and memory. Just before bed, I opened my inbox again. The HOA board had sent a follow-up. Dear Miss Drake, as of this evening, all pending approvals regarding event usage of 1177 Pine Hollow Road have been permanently closed. Any attempts to refile under alternate ownership will require independent verification through the Ashwood Ridge Clerk's Office. Please retain this confirmation for your records. Sincerely, Ellen Vickers, HOA Chair. The tone was official, dry. But to me it read like thunder. Not because it punished anyone, but because it documented plainly finally that the truth had been seen. And even if the world moved on, I could hold that paper in my hands and remember the moment it was no longer a question. The next morning, I woke to 3 voicemails and 12 new messages. I didn't open any of them right away. Instead, I made breakfast, swept the porch, and let the birdsong drift in through the window. It was only after the kettle had gone quiet that I sat down with my phone and began to scroll. The first message was from someone I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. A cousin who had once mocked me for bringing books to family barbecues. I saw the post. I always knew you were the one who kept that place alive. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. Another came from my father's old friend in Arizona. He had forwarded the HOA confirmation with a simple line beneath. Greg would have been proud of how you handled this. Even Aunt Cora, who had once described conflict as a low vibration, had sent me a voice memo filled with stammered apologies and halting gratitude. I didn't know, Camille. I didn't know they'd done that to you. I wish I'd asked more questions. I wish I'd listened. And then came the story. Sienna had posted it sometime around midnight. A soft pink background overlaid with black cursive. Some people ruin everything just by existing. Below that, a caption, not everyone's silence is graceful. The comments were divided. Some were vague affirmations. Others questioned what she meant. One asked outright if she had lost her venue. But one comment stood out. It read, sounds like someone finally told the truth. No username, no profile picture. Anonymous. But it had 5 likes and no replies. By noon, I had heard from the photographer again. He texted me this time apologizing for the awkward drop-off the day before. She wanted your image out of everything he wrote, said you'd taint the aesthetic. I didn't agree, but I didn't argue. I just kept the extras. I figured one day maybe they'd matter. They did. I thanked him. He didn't respond right away, but that was fine. Gratitude doesn't always need applause. Late afternoon, I received a knock at the door. Not forceful, just a gentle triple tap. It was Ellie Carver. She stood on my porch with a clipboard in hand and a windbreaker zipped all the way to her chin. Camille, she said, I hope this isn't too forward, but I wanted to give you this in person. She handed me a printed memo. HOA seal. Her signature at the bottom. It formally listed the event removal, cited verified property ownership, and referenced the photographic and affidavit support I had submitted. We rarely get involved in family disputes, she added, but this one. It was about more than just a party. I invited her in for tea and we talked briefly about zoning and the upcoming fall inspection schedules. She didn't ask about Sienna or Lorraine. She didn't need to. As she left, she looked at me and said something I hadn't expected. Sometimes the quiet ones are the ones who actually change things. By evening, my inbox was calm again. The phone didn't buzz. No more posts, no more cryptic captions. The noise had fallen off. But I wasn't the only one listening. From the upstairs window, I caught a glimpse of Travis standing near the back hedge of the country club lawn. He was with a man in a charcoal suit, thin, stern-looking, holding a leather folder. I didn't need to hear them to understand what was being said. Travis's jaw was tight. His hand moved through his hair like he'd done when we were teenagers back when he didn't have the words for his guilt. And then he turned and looked toward the cabin. We didn't wave. He didn't walk over, but for the first time I saw it in his eyes. He knew. And that was enough for now. By morning, the calm had already cracked. The soft silence I had cherished the night before was gone, replaced by the low roar of notifications humming on my phone like a distant siren. I stared at the lock screen. Mentions. Tags. Direct messages. The wave had arrived. I opened Instagram. Sienna's profile was pinned to the top of my feed like it had been waiting for me. The first slide was a soft focus selfie of her and Lorraine framed with a wreath filter, their faces pressed close. The text overlaid family sticks together through lies. The next slide cut harder. It was a cropped image of the notarized deed I'd shown at brunch. She had blurred the county seal and slapped bold black text across the bottom. Just because it's notarized doesn't make it real. Her caption below read, "Some people forge signatures and call it truth. Mental health is a real issue. Protect your peace." Lorraine commented with a string of heart emojis and one line that felt colder than anything else. We've always known who to trust. Other comments rolled in, some sympathetic, others skeptical. One read, "Wait, isn't Camille the one who saved the cabin back in the day?" Another replied, "I heard she was cut out for a reason." It wasn't just a smear, it was a narrative. They weren't denying the documents, they were denying my sanity. I sat back from the screen, fingers loose around my mug. I didn't feel rage. Not yet. What I felt was older than that. Familiar. Like walking into a room you used to cry in and finding the walls still echo. I closed the app without responding. Instead, I turned to the folders spread across my dining table. Legal, property, correspondence, testimony. I had been organizing them for days, but now I moved with purpose. I printed clean copies. I added date tabs. I clipped a fresh label to each envelope. I inserted the HOA ruling, the permit, the voice recording transcript, the affidavit from Mr. Lambert, the letter from Aunt Margot. I wasn't prepping for war. I was preserving history before someone else burned it down. At noon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, I found a familiar figure standing on the porch. Mr. Howard Lane. Former neighbor, now nearing 80. His presence brought a sudden rush of memory, rusted lawn chairs, lemonade in jelly jars, his quiet laugh the summer. My bike chain broke and he fixed it before I'd finished crying. He held a folded page in his hand. "I hope this isn't a bad time," he said. "Never for you," I answered, stepping aside. He came in still wearing his windbreaker despite the afternoon sun. "I saw some of what's going around," he said, voice low. "And I remembered something I figured might matter." He handed me the paper. A photocopy of his calendar from 23 years ago, the 14th of April 2001. "Drop-off notary at cabin, Greg." "You remember that day?" I asked. "I do. Clear as anything. Your father called me early that morning. Said the notary's car wasn't great on hills and asked if I'd drive her up. I picked her up from the diner in Ashwood. She had the whole kit, briefcase, embossing, seal, the works. You saw them sign?" "No, but I waited on the porch." She came out, document in hand. Greg shook her hand and told her, "Thanks for helping my daughter protect what's hers." Then he turned to me and said, "If they try anything, she's got this." I swallowed hard, throat dry. "Would you be willing to sign a statement, maybe even testify if it came to it?" He nodded immediately. "Happy to. I've got nothing to gain but peace. And I hate seeing people get erased." He stayed a while longer. We drank tea on the porch and he told me about his wife's rose garden and the way the new HOA president reminds him of a substitute math teacher. But under all of it, I could feel the weight of what he'd brought me. Proof that didn't come from blood but from memory. From someone who'd just paid attention. After he left, I typed up his statement, printed it, and added it to the witness folder. I labeled it Lane, Primary Support. Then I scanned it and backed it up to a cloud drive I'd created that morning. Just in case. I wasn't scared. But I wasn't naive. Sienna and Lorraine didn't care about the cabin. Not really. They cared about the wedding, the narrative, the spotlight. And now that their version of events had cracked in public, they were going to do everything they could to glue it back together with glitter and spin. Sure enough, an hour later my email pinged, a formal message from Lorraine's attorney. Polite. Vague. Concerned about public misrepresentation and family defamation. Hinting at a cease and desist. Suggesting a resolution could be met privately for the sake of legacy. I didn't reply. Instead, I drafted my own email. Addressed to my attorney, a quiet woman named Yvonne Briggs who once defended a local librarian being sued for refusing to purge banned books. I'd met her at a community panel last year and remembered her card. I found it pinned to the back of my fridge calendar and slid it into the folder marked Counsel. I attached every document, every scan, the HOA ruling, the county seal, Mr. Lane's affidavit, Margot's packet, the deed, the tax payment proof, my father's audio, and a single line beneath it all. This is the truth. If they want to fight, I'm ready, and I was. The air was cool when I stepped out of the car, but my palms were sweating. The Ashwood Ridge Community Center didn't look like the kind of place where battles were fought, but I knew better. Truth rarely required grand stages. Just enough light and the courage to speak it aloud. I carried the folder pressed to my chest like armor. Inside it, everything I needed, the notarized deed, the audio transcript, the letter from Aunt Margot, the signed affidavit from Mr. Lane, and most importantly, the guest book. The old thing still smelled faintly of cedar, the pages curled slightly from years spent on a dusty shelf, but the words inside hadn't faded. Words written in my father's hand. I pushed the glass door open and stepped inside. The main hall was already half full, neighbors and board members murmuring among themselves. I spotted Ellie Carver at the head table with 2 other board members adjusting her nameplate. Her gaze met mine briefly, and she nodded once, firm and formal. I took a seat near the front, but not too close. I didn't want to look like I was staging a coup, just telling the truth. Ellie called the meeting to order. First on the agenda was a landscaping dispute. Then someone raised a concern about a fence being too close to the sidewalk on Sycamore Drive. I waited eyes on my folder until Ellie finally reached item 3. We've received a formal request to revisit the usage rights of parcel 48C, known locally as the Drake Cabin, in light of disputed ownership and recent public claims. Miss Camille Drake has asked to speak. Miss Drake, the floor is yours. I stood slowly, every eye tracking my movement. I didn't rush. Thank you. I promise to keep this brief, but I will be thorough. I opened the guest book first. The bookmark guided me to the right page. I held it up. This is my father's handwriting. April 2001. I read it aloud. This place belongs to Camille. If you're reading this, it means she protected it. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. I set the guest book down gently, then retrieved the letter from Aunt Margot. I held it up. My aunt found this among my father's original records. It references the back taxes I paid as a teenager using my scholarship fund. It references my father's wish that I inherit the cabin directly, which he later formalized through this deed. I slid the notarized document onto the table. Then the audio transcript. Then the affidavit from Mr. Lane. Mr. Lane is a lifelong resident. He drove the notary to the cabin that day. He saw her leave with the signed document in hand and heard my father affirm the transfer. I also brought this. I clicked play on the old cassette player. My father's voice, raspy but unmistakable, filled the room. If they try to change this, fight it. I filed the deed. I left instructions. I chose Camille because she never asked to be chosen. She just showed up. When the recording ended, I let the silence linger. Then I said simply, I never wanted this to be public. But I won't let the story be rewritten. This cabin wasn't a venue. It wasn't a bargaining chip. It was a promise. And I kept it. I stepped back and sat down. No one spoke at first. Then slowly, a pair of hands began to clap. Not loud. Just honest. One clap became 2, then 3. Then the room echoed with steady applause, not polite, not performative, but real. I looked down, heart thudding. When I looked up, Sienna was already on her feet. Her expression was tight, unreadable. She looked around, realized no one was following her lead, and left without a word. Travis hesitated. He looked at me, held my gaze longer than I expected, then lowered his head and followed her out. Lorraine didn't stand immediately. She sat still, unmoving. For the first time in my life, I saw her look small. Not humiliated, not broken, just stripped of all pretense. When she finally stood, she didn't say a word. She simply turned and walked toward the door, clutching her purse like a shield. She didn't look back. The board resumed the meeting. They tried to steer back into normality, discussions of road salt budgets and seasonal HOA dues, but their voices were thinner now, like they too knew something bigger had just passed through. I gathered my papers without a word. Outside, the air smelled like pine and possibility. Not justice. Not revenge. But something quieter. Stronger. Resolution. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I stepped onto the cabin porch for what felt like the 100th time that month. But this time the air was different. Not heavy with dread or buzzing with unfinished business. Just still. Soft. A bouquet of wildflowers sat on the top step, wrapped in brown paper tied with twine. No flashy florist logo, no dramatic flourish. Just a folded note tucked beneath the stems, handwritten in small, deliberate script. I always knew. I just didn't speak. Aunt Margot. I sat on the step, the bouquet in my lap, the note still between my fingers. For years her silence had felt like absence, but now it felt like endurance, like waiting for the right moment to lean in. The wind stirred gently. Not angry, not warning. Just there. I pulled out my phone and scrolled down to my saved voicemails. It had been a while since I listened to the one I could never quite delete. My father's voice crackled into my ear like static from a dream. You never asked to be chosen. That's why I chose you. If they ever forget that, don't let them take it from you. I closed my eyes and let the words sit with me. It wasn't about winning, not really. It wasn't even about the cabin, it was about knowing that I hadn't imagined it. That the quiet love my father gave me, the trust he handed me in paper and ink, was real. And it mattered. I stood and unlocked the front door. The scent of pine and dust welcomed me like an old friend. I walked to the small wooden table by the entryway where my dad used to keep his flannel caps and the fishing licenses he always forgot to renew. I pulled out a folded sheet of paper and uncapped a pen. They thought I'd ruin the mood. But all I did was reveal what they tried to bury. I placed the note under the edge of a smooth river stone. Not for them, for whoever came next. A reminder that some truths don't need to be shouted, they just need to be left in plain sight. The light through the window shifted, catching motes of dust in its path like tiny dancers. I didn't linger, there was nothing left to arrange or sort. No more papers to file, no recordings to unearth. The truth had done its work. The rest belonged to time now. As I stepped off the porch, the breeze brushed against my cheek, not like a slap or a warning, but like a sigh. For the first time in years, I didn't flinch. I didn't think about Sienna's stories, or Lorraine's silence, or the wedding that no longer loomed like a storm cloud. I thought about the cabin. About the girl who once sat cross-legged beside her father, helping him stain floorboards, and falling in love with the sound of trees swaying above them. That girl had held the line, and she'd made it all the way back. I reached my car and paused, looking back at the porch one last time. No fireworks. No dramatic closing of the door. Just stillness. And then I smiled. Not out of spite or pride, but because it finally felt like mine. Not the cabin. The story. The truth. I slid into the driver's seat and turned the engine. The road curved gently out of the forest, and for once I didn't look in the rearview mirror. At the stop sign near the edge of the ridge, my phone buzzed with a new message. This one was from Ellie Carver. HOA records updated. Property confirmed under Camille Drake. Public notice issued. No further disputes pending. Short. Final. I let out a long breath, folded my phone shut, and kept driving. Somewhere down the road, a diner glowed with neon letters. I didn't need coffee, but I stopped anyway. Inside, the waitress handed me a menu and smiled. Long day, no, I said. Just a long story. She laughed lightly and walked away. I looked out the window. Someone had folded a napkin into the shape of a leaf. It sat by the sugar packets, slightly lopsided, like someone hadn't quite remembered how to do it but tried anyway. My father used to do that when things got tense at dinner. A leaf from a napkin. A peace offering. I traced the edge of it with my finger, then leaned back and let the quiet fill the space. Not empty. Not broken. Just finally at rest. And now maybe it's your turn. If your parents ever chose a lie over you, would you speak up or would you stay quiet to keep the peace? Tell me in the comments. Because sometimes the ones they say will ruin the mood are the ones who remember how it was built in the first place.